What's really shocking is that real wages have dropped by $9 an hour since the 1980s. My name is Samuel Ronan, and I hope to be your president one day. We talk about the economy, we talk about wages, we talk about cost of living, but what a lot of us tend to not wrap our heads around pretty well is the actual spending power of the dollar itself, right? The value of the dollar. Like what can $1 really get you today as opposed to 30, 40, or 50 years ago? And when you start doing that math, you have to also consider, okay, what were wages back then? What were the cost of goods back then? And how has that changed? So when we're talking about wage theft and inequality and all the poverty and all this other stuff, these are valid points, but in a vacuum. These are symptoms of the greater issue, which is that our economy, our productivity, and our compensation has largely not reflected the realities. So what do I mean by that? Our economy, growing. Our productivity, growing. Our wages, stagnant, but our real compensation has actually been dropping. Now, how can that be if minimum wage 50 years ago was $1.35 and now it's $7.25, $8, $22 in California now? How can our wages actually be less or considered stagnant if the number has gone up? Well, that's where inflation and other economic theory come into play, but long and short of it is, it's corporate greed, it's price gouging, it's artificial inflation, right? The true premise of inflation is that the more money is being circulated, the less it is worth. So then, how can record profits and record inflation go together? The short answer is they can't. That's not how that works. Record profits would actually be detrimented by record inflation, right? The more inflation, the less profits you actually have, because the less you can actually spend with that money. So what's actually happening is price gouging, which is illegal. And what's worse is that monopolies are occurring. Granted, yeah, fine. There's 4 industries in the food industry, but those 4 companies control every single brand you see on the shelf. And they can manipulate the market to their own ends, however they want. Which is why, again, record profits. Now, what about the productivity? Didn't we start this whole thing by saying wage inequality? Okay. If if $20 could buy you a full cart of groceries in 1990, but $20 can get you barely a gallon of milk, bread, and eggs, that is the devaluation of the dollar. All right, that's not just inflation. Inflation is not that powerful. It cannot literally reduce the value of the dollar so substantially in just 30 years. That's impossible. It is literally impossible, but it goes beyond the purview of this video. Productivity, however, has gone up by a factor of 2 or 3 or more, depending on which sector you're looking at. And yet real wages, the difference between what that productivity, i.e. how much money they make from our labor that we're paying, that gap is only ever increasing. And that wage gap, that wage inequality, that is the number that should concern us most. If you're making $22 an hour, you're making a company around $89 an hour or more, depending on the industry. So where's that other $50 going per hour? Profits. Pure, unmitigated profits. And that's the problem, that we are not being told, we are not being taught, we are not being shared, because it's not in their best interests. If we started learning collectively and understanding collectively that we are being robbed, hand over fist, robbed, pillaged, and plundered, we would riot. We would be in the streets. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is, we should be rioting in the streets. We should be upset. We should be angry. We should be holding our government and employers responsible, because we're the ones doing all the work. We're the ones taking all the risk. So I encourage you to speak to your fellows, your neighbors, your friends, and your family, and start talking about wages. Start talking about wage inequality, and let's start taking back ownership of our labor and our value as people, not just numbers on a spreadsheet.